and go. Well, hello guys, welcome back to another episode on the SAGA channel. Last week we released a video that we shot for Ocean Technology Systems about their Spectrum full face mask. It was a bit of a show reel that was chopped up into 8 small Facebook commercials and Instagram commercials. You may have seen them, and we got a lot of questions on how this was all shot, and it's surprisingly simple. I've made videos in the past, which I'll link below, on using a GoPro for a lot of my underwater shooting, even when I expect a little bit higher quality, and there were a lot of questions on how we did that, so that's what we're going to zoom in to today. So the first step, guys, to getting a project like this properly off the ground is, of course, communicating very well with the customer and figuring out what they expect. So we, of course, had a series of calls, made sure that we were on the same page, particularly first in regards to how long should it be, what type of quality do we expect, and how can we best showcase the product, right? So a way that I like to do that is usually just hit Google Images and try to get some imagery together to figure out a visual language that we both can agree on. So once we agree on all of that, then we move on to one thing that I do anyway is storyboarding. So I actually, and I have it right here, is I start figuring out the shots that I want to get. Usually when I storyboard, I just make whatever I think is best, regardless of whether I can shoot it or not. So I try to aim for the best possible shot, and afterwards I'll find a way to figure out how to do that. Now, this is not always possible. Sometimes some shots simply don't work, and then I'll have to get creative. But if we use this example right here, for instance, like I said, most of it is shot on a GoPro, although this one involved a drone shot, as we see here on the top, for which we use the DJI Mavic Air. And the shot on the bottom of the page is a good example of one that, you know, obviously my drawing skills are really not spectacular, but it gives me an idea of what I want, right? And what I did then was I actually asked a colleague of mine if we could pre-visualize it together. Now, you may think that that's maybe a bit unnecessary, but for me, pre-visualizing it really helps. Most of the video is shot in slow motion, 120 frames per second, and pre-visualizing it at that speed gives me a really good idea of how long those shots are going to be, how far does the camera need to travel, how long does an actor's movement need to be for a shot to end up at a certain length, at a certain speed. So that really did help, and I think this shot is a very good example. If you take the concept photo that we just picked off of the internet, to the storyboard, to the pre-visualization, to the actual shoot, you can really see it build very nicely. There's another one, I think, right here that I think is sort of storyboarded well for me anyway. There's a movement arrow in there, and the sun is in there, so I kind of know exactly what I want, pre-visualize it, and then shoot it. And having that thought out before we start shooting obviously makes that when I get to the to the editing stage of it all, that the shots are going to work in sequence, right? There's nothing worse than shooting a bunch of, let's say, close-ups and then realize that you're trying to stitch 3 close-ups together and they're really nothing more than jump cuts, right? From the storyboarding, of course, then we have to start finding actors. This is another stage where, of course, the client is involved in the sense that we present actors, models, to see if they work, right? Because ultimately they are kind of representing the brand, the product, so that needs to work as well. And that went fairly easy, although in this case we of course needed to make sure that we had scuba divers, because this is a scuba commercial, so we needed to make sure that the people are scuba diving certified and comfortable with full face masks. We did a small session also to make sure that everybody was familiar with the particular mask, because we want to keep things safe even when there is a safety diver of course involved in the shoot, right? So after the actors are briefed, after everybody agrees on the shoot, then we need to start preparing the gear. This is a very gear heavy production, because of course the Spectrum full face masks are the star of the commercial, so they need to look very good. We also were able to use some beautiful Apex regulators. Again, that's something you discuss with the client, even though it's not an Apex commercial. This was the choice that was made. And it's very important, of course, to prep all that gear, make sure that the masks are defogged, make sure everything functions properly, make sure we had a few little trinkets like action camera mounts and light rails and comm systems. So we want to make sure that all of that is properly functional, so that during the shoot we have what we need whenever we need it. So after the gear prep, we of course get to the shoot. Now this is probably the most interesting part, and the reason maybe that you're watching this video. As I said, 90% of this video is shot on GoPro. There's one drone shot in there for which we used the Mavic Air, and there's a couple of close-ups for which we used the SLR, right? The reason that I used a DSLR camera for those is to get a little bit less depth of field, a little bit out of focus element. Maybe you can guess which ones they are and let me know in the comments. I think there's about three or four shots in there. There's a shot on a DSLR. They're all above water. So everything underwater and a lot at the surface is shot with the GoPro Hero 7, although I did use a little bit of help. I built a contraption that looks a little bit freaky, I'll admit it, but I have it right here. And it's actually a regular GoPro Hero 7 in the action mount. And a simple GoPro Tray. I think we've talked about this before, even in one of our videos. And then a field monitor, right? An HDMI field monitor that gives us a live view of what we're doing. The tricky part with the GoPro is sometimes that if you want to get angles that are really high, low, or just weird places, it's sometimes really hard to see the screen. The screen is also very small, and having a larger field monitor that can, you know, be forced into different positions really does help knowing what you're doing, framing the shot properly. You can see a little bit more detail, and you can also instantly review the material after you've shot it, share it with your talents, your actors, so they can see what they did and did not like, right? So yeah, for me this works really well. I love working like this. Again, shooting at 120 frames per second and slowing it down also creates some extra stability, so that helps really well. If you guys are interested, by the way, the monitor we used was the NIR, I think you pronounce it NIR, the NIR field monitor, the F100. This, I don't know these guys, and I'm not getting anything for mentioning this, but I will say that the monitor performed really, really well during the shoot and was very useful. So for those of you guys who are maybe looking into pimping your own GoPro rig, that's what I used, and that worked really well. The monitor is actually installed upside down, but there's of course a menu function to flip the image upside down. So that's how we did that. Worked really well. During the shoot, we of course needed also a little bit of extra light. We had a few Kraken Hydra dive lights that we kind of positioned here and there, although most of it is actually shot really rather shallow, right? And the reason that everything looks a little bit more maybe professional is of course that pre-visualization, going through the motions of deciding what we want. working really well to get all the props together, even the, you know, the shirts, the sunglasses, the shoes that you may not even notice, the dive knife on the leg. All the little details are obviously planned on beforehand so that the image looks like it makes sense, right? For lighting at the surface, we had one more tool, and that's a reflection panel. So you can obviously imagine that bouncing a little bit of light on the subject kind of gives it that filmic look as well. Works really, really nice, I must say. Very happy with it. This is a Mountdog. I'll put a link downstairs. Again, super happy with it and not that expensive at all. Other than that, guys, in terms of cameras, there is another video that I mentioned earlier on how to get the best results out of the GoPro. All the settings that I use are, we go through one by one in that video, so you should definitely check it out. The link is below. Because one very important thing is to shoot in Pro Tune. Because shooting in Pro Tune, you're gonna get a relatively flat image. However, that's going to give you the highest level of wiggle room afterwards. So obviously, the images are quite heavily color graded. That's what gives it that very exotic, strange look. And that is, of course, something that is again thought out and discussed with the customer. Editing, we are editing in Adobe Premiere Pro. That's my go-to, but of course, if you use, let's say, Final Cut, maybe Avid, that's all fine as well, of course. In the editing stage, so the first thing we had to do was, of course, bring everything down in speed, right? Because by design, it was shot at 120 frames per second, which you can then slow down to 25%, so 4 times, creating a really nice and smooth result. Of course, you can also stabilize the footage somewhat. Shooting the GoPro 7 gives the advantage that you have some built-in stabilization even at 120 frames. There was one shot at the end of the diver surfacing and opening the ABV. That shot at 240 frames per second, so there's no stabilization there. If you would watch that shot in real time, it goes very, very fast, right? But slowing that down, of course, you can see every single water droplet falling down. You get really nice detail. So assembling everything, and then what I personally find the absolute worst moment, and I think many filmmakers will agree, is the we call it kill your darlings, right? There's gonna be shots that are just nice, that we really like, but that the customer just doesn't want, you know, and that's okay. It's their movie. That's who we're shooting it for. So we trim it down to a length that works for them. And then we can start color grading. So like I said, this particular commercial is color graded quite heavily, again, to give that sort of exotic, strange look, a little bit mysterious, which I think really complements the mask. It's a bit of an eerie, out of this world mask, and that works really well, as well as the music, right? So I picked for music it's almost more an ambient sound, but it has a sort of an alien quality to it and still works in that diving setting, right? After everything is put together, trimmed, slowed down, and then color graded, now it's time to, of course, bring that to the customer for a final evaluation. Per this assignment, it had to be broken down as well in 8 short Facebook/Instagram videos that could be used in a carousel. So I pre-visualized that a little bit so we can see what that hypothetically looks like. But again, there often carousels are in a 1:1 ratio, so they're square, whereas we shoot in a 16:9 ratio, which is of course a lot wider. So in editing that, we have to, of course, crop the footage. It's again a little bit kill your darling sometimes, because sometimes the image just, I mean, it's shot in 16:9, and that is obviously when it looks best. So then once the customer is completely satisfied with the footage, we sign over the rights and it is no longer ours. Luckily, Ocean Technology Systems gave us permission to use it on our YouTube channel as well. And that gives us the ability right now to show it to you guys, which hopefully encourages you to maybe pursue your underwater photography, videography a little bit further, if that's the type of thing you're into. Guys, thank you so much for watching. If you like this kind of content, give us a like, maybe a little comment, and subscribe to the channel. It really helps the channel and it enables us to bring more content like this to you guys. If you are, by the way, interested in your own OTS Spectrum full face mask, if you use the promo code INSTA10 in the dive shop, in the link below in the web shop, then you get a 10% discount. So there's that as well. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.